Hey everyone, welcome to the Tech News. Instead of the variety of news that we usually bring you, today's segment focuses on something that's been going on for a few months, but is pretty big news today. We're talking about Google versus Australia. In retaliation to a bill that was proposed in the Parliament of Australia in December 2020, Google and Facebook, who will be most affected by this bill, say they may be forced to withdraw their services from Australia. So, why is this happening? What is this bill? Will Australia no longer have Facebook or Google? Will they turn to the Chinese counterparts of these websites? Let's find out. Cue intro. I don't have an intro. Let's get right into it. So, what is this story all about? Well, long story short, it's about money. More specifically, the way revenue is shared between platforms owned by Google and Facebook and local Australian news agencies. Given that Google and Facebook are such large platforms, a lot of user traffic gets directed via their search results and recommended links to articles on the news agencies' websites. This process provides both the platforms as well as the news agencies with revenue. Somewhere along the line, though, the news agencies decided the split in revenue was not fair and that it favored the platform more than it did them. So the agencies then decided to negotiate a better deal with the internet media platforms. When they realized the negotiations weren't going quite as planned, the Australian government stepped in and asked the ACCC, well, I call it the ACCC, it's actually the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, let's call them ACCC from now, to develop a code of conduct for revenue negotiations between websites such as Google and Facebook and the local news agencies. You see, the Australian government was of the opinion that such behemoth websites, like Google and Facebook, for instance, had far too much power at the negotiating table compared with their local news media agencies. You know, the little guy. Small organizations like Nine Entertainment Company with just a revenue of over about $1 billion annually, or for example, News Corp, annual revenues about $9 to $10 billion. The underdogs. Oh, and by the way, News Corp is owned by Rupert Murdoch. Just putting it out there. So the ACCC did in fact formulate a voluntary code of conduct for negotiations, but in 2020 they advised the government that their code simply wasn't working and that no one was really able to come to any sort of agreement. So in April 2020, the government asked the ACCC to develop a mandatory code of conduct for negotiations that would be binding on all parties involved. At the end of July, the ACCC had formed a draft bill, and by December, the final version of the bill was introduced in the Parliament of Australia. So, what is this bill? Okay, first of all, the bill is public and you can go look this up yourself. But it is a long, dense, dry piece of legislation. We'll try and give you the important details that are driving today's conversation. To understand the bill, however, we have to talk about Google AdSense. AdSense is a Google product that you can buy in order to promote your content. Once you buy into it, your advertisement will be promoted by the Google algorithm based on relevance. Specific to news articles is something called top stories. You might have come across it in some of your Google searches. Basically, if you search something on Google, you'll get a few search results and then you'll get a section called top stories. This is basically Google's AdSense network at play. Google's algorithm is finding relevant content to your search and promoting it to your front page. When you click on one of those links, Google gets a certain amount of revenue per click. And when you land on the news agency's websites, the news agency can monetize that by either asking you for a subscription fee or by running its own advertisements. In this way, all the entities involved have something to earn. Now, the news agencies contend that Google should in fact pay them for featuring their links in their search results in the first place. Now, it must be noted that Google already has an existing initiative for this sort of thing called the Google News Initiative. And how that works is basically Google pays content creators, i.e., news agencies, to provide curated news feeds that it would feature in its Google News app, which it then monetizes by asking users for subscriptions and so on. However, the Australian agencies didn't think that this was enough and wanted Google and Facebook to pay for the privilege of linking their websites in the first place. Now, at the negotiation table, one would assume the news agencies said that they're the ones making the content and therefore they should set the terms and conditions of the revenue share. And at the other end of the table, Google and Facebook would probably say that it's the efficacy of their algorithms and platforms that give these news agencies so much viewership in the first place. Now, if you're wondering which of these two waypoints carry weight at the negotiating table, the answer is in the bill itself. You see, the bill was made to address this perceived deficiency in negotiating power. And the bill is made heavily in favor of Australian local news agencies, meaning that Google and Facebook were presumed to have the upper hand at the negotiating table anyway. Whether these companies have the upper hand because of their virtual monopoly in this space, or because they are actually better drivers of viewership is in contention. And the answer is probably a combination of the two. And the Australian government says the bill, is to protect the interests of its free press. And that sounds great. Except the bill itself doesn't quite hold up to these ideals. Now, before I go on, it is important to say that while the bill is heavily in favor of Australian news agencies, there have been many requests by Google and Facebook that have been taken on board on the final draft of the bill. Nonetheless, there are some major issues with the bill. Theoretically, this sort of bill should be advantageous to all news agencies in Australia, right? Not quite. See, small media houses don't seem to benefit from the bill. In order to benefit from the bill, news agencies would have to fulfill certain requirements, one of which just happens to be a minimum annual revenue of $150,000. So if you're a small news agency startup looking to promote yourself and looking to avail of the facilities of the bill, you're out of luck. Oddly, the bill also stipulates certain things that Google and Facebook must do, such as share user behavior data and data about any changes that they would make to the algorithm that affect referrals and advertisements. So in this case, that would mean that a select few news agencies that could in fact take advantage of the bill would also have access to user behavior data and algorithmic changes, thereby enabling them to tweak the way their ads are presented and tweak the way their articles are presented in order to gain more exposure. Now, on the one hand, it's hard to say the algorithm itself is fair because there is a lack of transparency as to how it works. However, if such information was made available only to certain parties, that would obviously be an unfair advantage to that select few. One other thing the bill does is it lets companies refer negotiations to arbitration. However, the results of the arbitration are only valid for 12 months. One could see how this could lead to a situation where companies would constantly be in arbitration every 12 months or so. This sounds complex, this sounds expensive, and once again, not only not beneficial to any of the parties involved, but also not beneficial to small businesses and small news agencies. Certain prominent personalities have said that the bill basically makes online platforms pay for the privilege of even providing links to these websites in the first place. They say that free linkage is the basis of the internet and that this bill would change that landscape forever. What do you think? Do Google and Facebook need to be taken down a notch because they are virtual monopolies? Is the Australian government really looking after their free press? Or are the news agencies and the Australian government compensating for the lack of their ability to cash in on the internet age? There's a comment section down below. Let's talk. That's it for Tech News today, guys. Thank you for tuning in. I'll see you in the next one, but till then, stay happy, stay peaceful, stay colorful. Bye.